Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. And welcome back, everybody. Have you ever thought about writing a book? Maybe you've got ideas, whether they're fiction or nonfiction. They're kind of floating around in your head. And you might have thought to yourself, I don't know if I could do that. What you need is somebody to walk the journey. And I've got that person. He's got a great publishing company called NFB Publishing. And we're going to look at some of the titles that he's helped publish and speak with an author today as well. Mark Pogodzinski joins us on the program. Hey, Mark, how you doing today?
Good. How are you? Good.
And I'm going to get it out here and be clear. I love you, but I'm not shoveling your driveway. I'm saying it right now.
But as I look out the window, it is snowing pretty badly here.
Wow. You're up in Buffalo, right?
Yes, sir.
Wow. Yeah. I'm in downstate New York. We've gotten nothing more than just with two storms, maybe an inch and a quarter. That's been it so far. Let's bring in Matt Bindig, who is our author today. Matt, how's your weather? Why don't we check that?
Same kind of deal. It's been a steady snow all day long. In fact, I was out on the ski slopes with my son earlier today, just really trying to take in the moment. So good stuff.
Wow. And are you located up in the Buffalo area too?
Yeah, I live just south of Buffalo, about 20 minutes south of Buffalo.
Gotcha. Well, welcome. Fascinating to check out your books. And what's interesting today, a little bit different, you've written a fiction and nonfiction book, both completely unrelated, but two different aspects there. Is this your first foray into writing, Matt?
Well, I've been writing for years, and but the first book that came out in 2016 was my first full-length book. So yeah, up to that point, it had really been just short stories and poems.
I want to go to the beginning and get really deeper inside your head. When you were considering publishing a book, did you have some apprehension? Were you saying to yourself, I don't know if I could do this?
Well, yeah, I think that, I didn't really know anything about it. I just had a story that was really dying to get out. And, over the course of several years, I was sort of putting notes together. And finally, I asked my wife if I could have 10 days of summer to work on it. We had very little children at the time. And so, I would sit down and I would do the old, write from 6:30 in the morning until 10 at night. And it took me 3 years to write the first draft, working that way, which was, 600 pages long and very bad. And in my inexperienced mindset, I thought, well, I'll just send it out to, some fancy people in New York City and they'll be grateful to receive it and I'll get $1 million. And after a couple of years of doing that, and just sort of researching on the side, I saw a review of a book that Mark's company put out in the Buffalo News. And I thought, oh, here's a local place. And, I reached out to Mark and we got coffee and talked about the process, and the rest is been very positive for me, and that's how I kind of found Mark.
Amazing. I want to focus on your nonfiction book first, which is Far from the Twisted Reach: The Last Road Trip Ever. At first value, looking at it, it looks like it could be a fiction book. Mm-hmm. Just looking at the cover, maybe the title and just, the initial vibe, but this is a real story. Tell us about that.
Yeah. In the summer of 2019, my family took a trip out west. We flew to California and then over 3 weeks circled through 6 national parks on a 3,700 mile road trip. My kids were 13, 10, and 7 at the time. And I had always dreamed of driving across the country, but, reality of my life and finances and time and all of those things really limited that idea. So, as all things in marriage, it was a compromise. And, I just kept a journal along the way. on that trip as a sort of keepsake idea. I had no idea that I was going to write anything about it. I really very much at that time thought of myself as a fiction writer. Save for, like the annoying Christmas letter that I send out every year. And when we got home, the world just felt so transformed for me from that trip that, I was just sort of processing that and rereading the journal and things like that. And then, of course, March 2020 came around with COVID, and, the world shut down, and I had lots of time and space to think about that. So I decided that I would try to put that story of the family trip into a collection of essays. So each one of the days of the trip is one of the chapters of the book, save for a prologue and an afterword. So that's kind of the structure of it. And so they really are sort of like narrative essays. But it's hard for me to get out of the habit of writing, with like imagery and a sort of fictional sense of purpose. So it's definitely infused with that idea. It isn't just like a straight telling of it. The reflections that come from writing about personal experiences, a large part of what the book is about as well. I was really trying to capture that time and a place, both in my life, but for us as a world before COVID. And it isn't really until the afterward that I acknowledge the after of COVID.
What do you want people to take away after reading this book? Would you say, at least at the very least, it's the adventure, and that we all should find adventure in life?
Absolutely. I would say that I was in a pretty dark place when I initially took the trip. I was really struggling with depression and come to grips with my kids coming of age and aging myself, and, being married for a long time and still trying to find purpose and meaning in that relationship and my job. So I was really wrestling with a lot of those things that I think a lot of guys in their mid 40s wrestle with, as cliche as it sounds. And not just guys in their mid 40s, but people in general. I mean, it was a really tumultuous time. Even before the pandemic stuff happened, the world was really on fire in a lot of ways. And so it's a long answer to your short question, but when I sat down to write the book, I had a sticky note on the computer screen, and it said, tell the truth, be honest, write the type of book you would want to read, and say it any damn way you please. And my ultimate goal there, I think, is to just sort of, I hope that people who read it maybe feel a little bit less alone. Maybe they'll be able to identify with some of the things that I write about, whether they have a family or not. But also, to just be honest. I think that honesty is a bomb for a lot of problems we have in the world. So when people can kind of say like, yeah, I went on this trip, I think a lot of people, identify with the idea of taking a trip as a family, and they can be kind of touchstone moments in kids' lives and families' lives. And to be able to dip your toes into another family's journey, I think helps you reflect on your own. I can't tell you how many of my readers or at book talks or stuff that I've done, people have talked about iconic family trips they've gone on and how those have created these sort of benchmark memories in their own childhood, and how reading the book reminded them of that and opened some of those doors, got them thinking about what their parents might have been going through when they were doing that. Because, as your kid, you don't really even think of your parent as a real person. So it's just, again, all of that stuff was sort of swirling about. But to be honest with you, I very seldomly, when I write, sit down with this like umbrella purpose over my head. I was really just sort of saying like, I want to be in the moment of this day that we spend here and try to reflect on what I felt and how it worked out. And the purpose just kind of emerges. I'm not a very like purpose driven. This is the message I want to communicate. It's just more, this is the message that gets communicated.
I want to go to the process of the book in a second with Mark, but even before we get there, curious, family trip, 3 weeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you find a reconnection with your family in doing so?
So as I mentioned, my kids were 13, 10, and 7. And I'm a very engaged dad. I've like coached my kids a ton and, read to them a lot when they were kids and stuff like that. So I was sort of existing in this place where I myself felt very disconnected from the world. But I don't think people who know me well would have said that. So that's a big lift. I think a lot of people who struggle with depression deal with that, but they like want to sort of like keep that in this dark corner because it's not a thing people are proud to talk about or
Sure.
whatever. So, it's funny. I was just talking to my son today, who's now in college, about the book. And, I think he's a little embarrassed about how he's portrayed in it because he was 13. And, when you're a young man and you look back at your 13-year-old self, who wouldn't be embarrassed? Because 13-year-olds are tough. So the connection that I felt with my kids, I just tried to be as authentic as possible. Kids go through different stages,
Sure.
as do parents. And I said to my son, your first child is the one you make all your mistakes on. And those are like very clear in the book. You can like, if you're an objective reader and you're reading that, you're like, God, what a knucklehead dad, or, oh man, that kid's a pain in the neck. And I just tried to, like I said, be authentic about it. And I think, folks who have children would definitely recognize that.
Wow. We have sons the same age, by the way. So I can relate. I get it.
Yeah.
Mark, when you saw the concept for this book, what was your initial thought? And when it started coming to fruition, were there things that had to be massaged within the story or the presentation of it?
I didn't want to change anything that Matt had written because, as he said, the whole point of the book was to be honest about a time in his life, honest about what was going on. And I like the idea of a journey, the literal journey of going on it, but like the deeper meaning of a journey of discovery, reconnecting with family. And when I read it, I came up with the idea that it was like a Thoreau, a modern day Thoreau, where Thoreau tries to go live authentically, and he goes to live, at Walden and out in the woods, where Matt tries to live authentically within the structure of his family. Both are authentic because of the men who are living them. And I thought that was a really great idea of the book and a great theme throughout. And I like the idea that it's not perfect. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. And, we reconnected and we reaffirmed everything and we just went on a happy life that, there's always issues. There's always, again, the honesty of a daily life and a trip like that. I thought that was really something important. And it's, it spoke to me. I think it speaks to a lot of people.
I believe as a parent, it's one of those things that we always wanted to do. Never got a chance to do it. Never say never, but kids are getting older. You got to do it. And I'm sure along the way, when you read the book, there's some realizations that you had in your children, had in your marriage. So we don't run out of time. Let's pivot from the nonfiction to the fiction. Very unique that you've written both, Matt. Mm-hmm. And that book is called Nothing Here Is Real. What's that book about?
Well, that book is about trying to, reclaim your own story, sort of broadly. Concretely, it's a story of a man, Grady Pickett, who, faces his personal tragedy of losing a child and decides to come back to his hometown and face some of the conflicts that initially led him to leave. And when he comes home, he's confronted with family members, people in his life who are telling the story of his past that he has lived in a very different way than it actually happened. and that he remembers. And so he has to sort of reconcile this idea of the truth of his own story compared to, the truth that's unfolding before him. And I would say I was very much moved to write that story because of the world that we were living in at the time, the build up to the war in Iraq, and then the war in Iraq as it played out. I was a young man when that stuff all started happening. I mean, it's just in one of my first couple of years of working when 9/11 happened. And, to be told, like, here are these weapons of mass destruction. These are the people who are, attacking us. Here are the videos of these stockpile places. And then that all proving not to be true. When you live in a world like that, where there are certain people controlling the narrative that say one thing and your lived reality is another, it's very disorienting. And so I thought to sort of wrestle with that idea in a personal context of an individual person wrestling, with trying to find the truth of their own lives that they live. They're like, wait, what? Like, that was generally what I was after. So I guess the story unfolded from there. The writing of a fiction book to me is an entirely different act than the writing of a nonfiction book. As I said, for years, that idea was sort of bouncing around in my head. And I'd go for runs and come home and feverishly sketch notes, and I had a pile of scraps of paper that was about this big when I sat down to write it. And I would just sort of write through the scraps, trying to trace the story together.
Wow.
So for me, fiction is very much like chasing images and trying to weave narrative parts that seem unrelated together. It's a much harder thing to do, I think, than a nonfiction story. At least it was in my experience.
Would you say that there's a piece of you in the main character, Grady?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people who know me would be like, well, you're kind of Grady, right? Like, and I think that, my experience as a fiction writer has always, I think it was Faulkner who said, you got to write what you know. And so that is a place I always start from, in my head when I'm writing about the woods. There's a really pivotal scene in the book that happens between Grady and his brother Emil, deep in this woods that's in their neighborhood. And certainly when I was thinking of writing that scene, the woods that was playing out in my head was the woods that my brother and I had played in when we were kids. Now, Emil is not my brother and I am not Grady. And there's only really a small portion of the book that is like factually based on things that happened to me. But I would say that there are many parts of the book that are shadows of things that have been factual, and like Tim O'Brien in his book, The Things They Carried, he talks about the difference between story truth and happening truth, and how sometimes story truth can actually be strangely truer than happening truth. So in that sense, I guess I would agree with Tim O'Brien when it comes to the elements of my life that are reflected in that book. If there is any connection, it's really just straight story truth.
I have a great visual, even you talking about the woods and taking me back to my childhood. And if I were to write about the woods, I would refer back to what it was like when I was a child, when I was a teenager or whatever, just what the woods looked like, what it sounded like, what it felt like. Might not have any bearing on the story, but just getting into that zone of being there. Totally get it. And like you said, you have to write what you know. Mark, when you saw the concept of this book, what were your first thoughts?
I've always liked the concept of loss and someone trying to pursue loss. I think we talked about it once before. Like the essential part of being human is brokenness and trying to put yourself back together and to fill whatever hole you have with whatever it may be, like money, love, what have you. So I always like that as a theme. I think it's a theme in most books. And then it's like you hear about Matt's book and you look at the world around us today where fact checking has suddenly become something wrong. And the fiction is more important. And when fiction becomes more important than reality, things are going to go awry. And so I think the book is still it was topical when we wrote it. It's topical now. And so like those two things I thought were fascinating aspects of the book.
Matt, did you have to do some significant fact checking within this book?
Well, no, just because it's, fictional in that sense. When it comes to, I guess, I just want, if I can kind of take this answer in a different direction than
Sure.
that, just to respond to one of the things Mark said, Kafka says a good story must be an axe for the frozen sea inside of us. It must sort of break us open in some way to kind of let us see this new thing. And I guess for me, when it came to trying to understand, like the title, Nothing Here is Real, I mean, to live in a world where you feel that way is a pretty challenging way to exist, to try to navigate what's going on. And, that was like the third or fourth option of titles, but I eventually came to it and it was like, yeah, it's, from a poem I wrote when I was in high school, when, you're just trying to figure out the reality. So when it comes to fact checking stuff, I really, what Mark said there really resonated with me. Having a sense of truth, I think is a tremendous gift. So, the character in the book was constantly seeking like, hey, what is my reality? And when he feels like he has a sense of clarity, it's not like, this great redeeming thing. Sometimes the truth really is challenging to deal with, but at least you have that. At least you know that you're grounded in something that's concrete. So, I couldn't agree more that we live in these times where fact checking becomes like, kind of a dirty phrase to some, and alternative realities can exist. People blatantly say, look, we have alternative facts. There's really no such thing as alternative facts in my mind. So when you live in a world where that's embraced or welcomed as a way to solve problems, well, we'll just come up with these other facts, then you can't really have a common ground as people. And that's ultimately what the central conflict of that novel is.
Do you have another book brewing in your mind?
Yeah, I think, by the way, Mark, yes. I'm thinking I'm going in a different direction again, more a collection of short stories.
Which is being more and more popular these days. I'm seeing that show a lot, right?
Yeah, I think that's partially due to our fragmented attention span these days, that a collection of short stories is a little more palatable to a reader. Although
and you know what, the feeling of accomplishment, where it's like, I'm going to sit down. The other night, I sat down had some time, and I was going to dig into a book, and it's a book about manifestation. But I wanted to feel accomplished, but the chapters are so long. I'm like, I can't do this. I can't focus on it. If I could get it done in like 10, 12 pages, I was like, all right, got one chapter, got something out of it. So I totally agree with you in terms of our attention span. Yeah,
it's a thing. So it's kind of a fun challenge. When you say to yourself, all right, I'm going to keep this kind of short, as you can probably tell, that's not an easy thing for me to do.
Yeah.
So if I can find a way to get a beginning, middle, and end, and to sort of like wrestle with some idea that's important within the story structure, just looking for the challenge of it.
Sure. And I got to imagine too, the variety. And we're just about out of time. I just looked. The variety in doing short stories, because that one's done. On to the other one. What can I do now? On to that. Right. Do you look at it that way as kind of exciting in that regard?
Yeah, it's exciting. It allows you not to get as deeply invested in a character or a story. Writing a novel, I felt like those people were with me all the time. Whereas a short story, like you said, you can kind of put them away and come back to them. You're invested in just a different way.
Yeah.
Maybe the level of investment, I said that wrong, but a different way. In and out is a good way of putting it.
Final question, more of a personal one for you, Matt. You took this 3-week trip with your family. Had you ever considered taking a trip like that, or just a trip in general, just going solo?
Absolutely. I mean, if I, I like to think of life a little bit like one of those old choose your own adventure books, so I'm almost 50 years old. When I was a kid, those were, all over the place. Turn to page 37 if you want to fight the dragon. If you want to run away, turn to page 50. And, my life certainly has lots of those different paths. And one of those paths, an alternative universe, I left on the last day of school. I came back on the day before the first day, and that was just me in a car and long stretches. But obviously, I've been blessed with a family and a wife, and that has been my take here. But there'll be stretches of solitude down the road for sure.
Yeah. The reason I asked that is I'm on that cliff, ready to jump into the solo trip. Never took one before, and I hear it screaming that I need to do it. And
you got to answer that call. Answer that call while you can.
Thank you for saying that. Fantastic talking with both of you today. Mark, if somebody is like Matt and is thinking about, I want to write a book, I got some ideas, maybe it's based on something true in their life, how do they reach out to you?
We have the website, nfbpublishing.com. There's a small form to fill out. It gets the process started. And I'll be happy to help you craft your book, publish your book, whatever is necessary.
Yeah, and that's from start to finish. That's from the concept to fleshing the story out to the editing, right down to the cover and marketing the book too. Fantastic. Really fun talking with both of you today. I got to tell you, really was. I appreciate it. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for the opportunity. It's really a great pleasure of mine too.
We'll be right back. Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Adopt US Kids presents Multiple Choice Parenting.
Your daughter just had her first breakup. Do you A, put yourself in her shoes?
How could he do this to you? And for Sheila, she has split ends.
B, console her.
Oh, sweetie, this is going to happen a lot. 4, maybe 5 more times before you get married.
C, take charge.
Got to get this all straightened out. Give a little talking to, man to man, mano a mano. Hey, Steve! Is now a good time? No? Okay, no problem. Bye.
Or D, help her find a new boyfriend.
I know a great place to meet boys. The internet. Nice, single boys. Never mind. How about some ice cream?
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
For more information on how you can adopt, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.